She scrubs the palace steps to pay her father's debts, and the prince humiliates her before the court. Clara Voss dipped the bristle brush into a bucket of cold, grey water. The motion was mechanical now, back and forth, round and round, each stroke stripping the marble of its grime. The brush scraped against the stone with a grating sound that echoed faintly beneath the high-arched portico of Castle Falkenhof. She had long since lost feeling in her fingers. They were raw, the skin chapped and red, her knuckles stinging with each flex. Dawn's chill seeped through her threadbare wool dress and thin apron. The grand marble steps stretched above and below her in an endless expanse, each tier a polished monument to a life far removed from her own. Once, she had crossed these steps in satin slippers. Now, she scrubbed them. A sharp gust of wind swept through the courtyard, tugging strands of hair loose from beneath her linen cap. She ignored it. A servant paused nearby to glance down at her, his mouth curled in a smirk before moving on. Clara kept her gaze lowered to the stone beneath her hands. One more step, then another. A year ago she had been Clara Voss, daughter of Otto Voss, one of Lichtenwald's wealthiest merchants. Their home had been filled with books, laughter, and the scent of cinnamon cakes her mother used to bake. But her father's unexpected death, followed by the ruin of their trade contracts and crushing debts, had swept it all away like autumn leaves in a storm. The crown had seized their property. What little was spared had been auctioned. And Clara, with no dowry and no family left to protect her, had come here, to Castle Falkenhof, to labor under contract until the debt was repaid. She had signed the agreement herself, not out of choice, but out of necessity. A shadow fell across the steps. Clara glanced up instinctively, her gaze meeting that of a passing nobleman draped in fur-lined velvet. His powdered wig sat high on his head, and he looked down at her with thinly veiled amusement. "Careful, girl," he said, his voice light with mockery. "You've missed a spot." Without replying, Clara dipped her brush again. Her dignity was all she had left. She would not waste it on petty retorts. The nobles and courtiers had grown accustomed to her presence on the steps. She was part of the scenery now, a living reminder of what happened to those who fell from grace. Many found her existence amusing, a merchant's daughter reduced to scrubbing stone beneath their feet. And yet Clara kept her back straight and her gaze steady. They could laugh, they could sneer, but they would not see her broken. A bell chimed from within the palace, a hollow sound that reverberated across the stone walls. The sun was rising fully now, gilding the spires of the castle in pale gold. Clara straightened for a moment, rolling her aching shoulders. Her arms trembled with exhaustion, but there was no pause in her work. The palace was preparing for the grand ball that evening, a celebration of an impending political alliance between Lichtenwald and the Duchy of Ravensbrück. Ambassadors and foreign dignitaries were already arriving in droves, their carriages rumbling over the cobblestones. Inside, the palace was in a frenzy. Clara could hear it even from her place beneath the portico, servants rushing through the corridors, the sharp voices of chamberlains issuing orders, the scent of beeswax polish and lavender thick in the air. And she remained outside, scrubbing step after step as if the world within had nothing to do with her. By mid-morning, her bucket had turned dark with filth. She rose carefully, legs stiff, to fetch fresh water from the courtyard pump. As she crossed back toward the steps, a tray-bearing footman hurried past her, nearly colliding with a group of richly dressed courtiers entering the palace. Among them was Prince Friedrich Albrecht. Clara stilled instinctively, standing aside as the prince and his entourage swept past. Tall and broad-shouldered, Friedrich wore a tailored velvet frock coat the deep blue of midnight. A silver sash crossed his chest, and a jeweled ring gleamed on his gloved hand. His powdered hair was tied neatly at the nape of his neck. His expression was cool, detached, the gaze of a man accustomed to power. She would have remained unseen, another shadow among many, if not for what happened next. As the courtiers reached the base of the steps, a slender young nobleman, a cousin of the prince if rumor served, let his gaze flick toward Clara with thinly veiled amusement. With deliberate carelessness, he caught the edge of a passing footman's tray and tipped it forward. A cascade of red wine spilled across the marble. Clara acted on instinct. Without thought, she dropped to her knees and began blotting the liquid with her apron, desperate to prevent the stain from setting. The courtier laughed softly, folding his arms. "See how eager she is to please," he remarked to the others. Laughter rippled through the group. Prince Friedrich paused mid-step, his gaze lowering to the scene before him. For a moment, silence stretched taut in the air. "Is that one of the scullery maids?" he asked coolly, addressing the steward beside him. "Yes, Your Highness. The merchant's daughter." A flicker of recognition touched Friedrich's eyes. Clara did not look up, refusing to meet his gaze. Then the prince spoke, his voice smooth, yet edged with iron. "Since she is so eager to serve," he said, turning deliberately to the watching courtiers, "let her serve wine tonight at the ball. It will be a fitting reminder to all that rank and fortune may rise and fall as swiftly as the tides." A fresh wave of laughter followed. Clara's blood roared in her ears. Her face burned, but she forced her hands to remain steady as she gathered the soaked cloth. Only when the prince had turned away did she lift her head, her gaze falling upon his retreating form. She would obey. What choice did she have? But in her heart, a spark of fury caught and held. By evening, the palace glittered like a jewel. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering light across the great ballroom. Musicians tuned their violins beneath painted ceilings. Gilded mirrors reflected silks, brocades, and powdered wigs. The nobility had arrived in force, their laughter ringing clear above the strains of the orchestra. Clara stood at the threshold of the ballroom, a tray of wineglasses balanced in trembling hands. Her dress was the same plain woolen garment she had worn earlier. The apron had been hastily removed, leaving a faint outline of stains across the bodice. Her hair, damp with the steam of the kitchens, lay in limp curls beneath her cap. A steward gave her a curt nod. "Begin," he whispered. Clara stepped forward. The first few moments passed in a blur of motion, offering wine, bowing her head, moving from one cluster of nobles to the next. Their eyes followed her with open curiosity, their remarks sharp and cutting. "How far the merchant's daughter has fallen," one woman remarked, her voice sweet as sugar. "I remember her at the winter fete in silk and lace." A gentleman chuckled. "She scrubs stone by day and serves us by night. How delightfully poetic." Clara kept her chin level, her breath measured. Pride, she reminded herself. She would give them no further amusement. And then, across the sea of powdered faces, she met Prince Friedrich's gaze. He stood near the musician's platform, a glass of wine in hand. His expression was unreadable. Their eyes locked, for a breathless moment that seemed to stretch beyond reason. In Clara's gaze, there was no submission, only defiance. The prince's fingers tightened slightly around the stem of his glass. He looked away. The night dragged on. Clara moved through the ballroom like a ghost in plain sight. When at last the final strains of the orchestra faded and the courtiers began to disperse, she fled the room before anyone could stop her. Down the corridor, past the kitchens, into the shadowed servants' wing, only then did the tears come. Hot, silent, born of rage and humiliation alike. She wiped her face hastily as footsteps approached. A palace steward appeared in the doorway, a sealed document in hand. "You are to report to the upper kitchens tomorrow," he announced, his tone brisk. "By order of the steward general. Your duties on the palace steps are concluded." Clara stared at him, her breath caught. Before she could speak, he turned on his heel and vanished. She was left standing in the dim corridor, heart hammering, the meaning of the words sinking in like stone. The next morning arrived with the grey chill of early dawn, the sky a low-hanging canopy of clouds that promised a day of cold drizzle. Clara stood before the door to the upper kitchens, her heart a slow, steady drumbeat in her chest. The letter she had received the night before, a terse notice of reassignment, felt unreal even as she read it again by candlelight before dressing. Now, faced with the looming oak door, she squared her shoulders and pushed it open. The upper kitchens of Castle Falkenhof were a world apart from the scullery. Heat radiated from the great hearths at either end of the cavernous room. Copper pots gleamed from ceiling hooks, and the tang of roasting meats and rich spices hung thick in the air. Servants moved in tightly choreographed patterns, kneading dough, tending to sauces, preparing intricate dishes under the sharp gaze of the head cook. At the center of this carefully controlled chaos stood Master Hahn. He was a broad-shouldered man with silver hair cropped close to his head, a scar running from the corner of one eye down his cheek, rumored to be from a hunting accident, though no one dared ask. His voice could cut through stone. The moment Clara entered, his eyes narrowed. "You are the Voss girl?" he asked without preamble, a ladle clenched in one meaty fist. "Yes, sir," she answered, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "You will scrub no steps here," he said sharply. "You will prove yourself. I run this kitchen as a ship's captain runs his deck. No slackers, no fools. Do you understand?" "I do." He studied her a moment longer, then gestured to a nearby work table. "You will begin by preparing herbs and tending the ovens. Stay out of the way, and do not cause delay." "Yes, sir." Clara moved to her station, fingers trembling slightly as she gathered the bunches of fresh thyme, rosemary, and sage laid out before her. The first hours passed in a haze of motion, sorting, washing, plucking leaves with swift precision. She caught sidelong glances from the other kitchen maids, some curious, others openly hostile. They knew who she was, or had been. Resentment simmered beneath the surface. But Clara worked with quiet determination. Failure was not an option. Her reassignment could as easily be reversed if she faltered. Worse, dismissal would mean disgrace, too deep to overcome. By midday, her apron was damp with sweat despite the cool air outside. The heat of the ovens pressed close, and the endless clatter of knives and pans rang in her ears. Twice Master Hahn corrected her technique with a curt word or a flick of his ladle. But when a tray of perfectly browned tarts emerged from the oven under her watchful eye, he gave a single approving nod. It was not praise, but it was not censure either. Grudging respect began to stir among some of the staff. A few exchanged glances when they thought she wasn't looking. One of the younger kitchen boys even whispered, "She works like she's been here a year already." Not all were pleased. A pair of older kitchen maids, who had long claimed the favored stations near the head cook, watched Clara with narrowed eyes. Their muttered remarks followed her from table to hearth. She ignored them. The days that followed unfolded in similar fashion. Clara rose before dawn and worked long after the sunset, her hands growing deft with knife and spoon, her mind sharp as she memorized the rhythms of the upper kitchen. Fatigue pressed at her constantly, but pride would not allow her to yield. By the 5th day, she had earned the grudging acknowledgement of Master Hahn. "She learns," he remarked aloud, after she executed a difficult sauce without error. And yet, even as her skill grew, so did the weight of unseen eyes. Servants gossiped. Nobles whispered. Clara felt it, tendrils of curiosity and speculation creeping through the palace halls. The memory of the ball still hung in the air, a shadow over her every movement. Late one afternoon, as grey rain streaked the kitchen windows, Clara was summoned by a steward to the outer corridor. "You will deliver this," he instructed, handing her a silver tray adorned with a porcelain teapot, 2 cups, and a plate of honey biscuits. "To His Highness's private library, now." Clara hesitated only a moment before nodding. The prince's private library, a space forbidden to ordinary servants, let alone to her. Balancing the tray carefully, she made her way through the labyrinthine halls of the East Wing. Guards posted outside the library door gave her a cursory glance before stepping aside. Heart-hammering, Clara entered the room. The space was vast and hushed, lined floor to ceiling with dark oak shelves heavy with leather-bound volumes. Tall windows admitted pale afternoon light through rain-streaked glass. The scent of old parchment and beeswax filled the air. No one was present. Exhaling slowly, Clara advanced to a low table near the hearth and began arranging the tray with practiced care. Her movements were precise, deliberate. If she betrayed nerves, they did not show in her hands. She had just set the final cup in place when the door clicked shut behind her. She turned, her breath catching. Prince Friedrich stood in the doorway, one brow faintly raised in surprise. For a moment, neither spoke. Clara straightened instinctively, her chin lifting a fraction. The prince's gaze swept over her, not with the cold amusement of the ballroom, but with something quieter, appraising, curious. "You are the Voss girl," he said finally, his tone even. "Yes, Your Highness." His mouth tilted in what might have been a smile, or something close to it. "Serving wine at the ball was not my intention for today," he remarked dryly, stepping farther into the room. His voice was cultured, precise. Clara remained still, her posture rigid. "I was sent to deliver this," she said, her tone neutral. "So I see." He moved past her to the table, fingers brushing the edge of the porcelain cup. The silence stretched between them, taut and electric. "You carry yourself differently than most," he said, his gaze lingering on her. "One might almost forget you are a servant." The words were neither compliment nor insult. Clara chose her reply with care. "One might also forget that circumstances are not always a reflection of worth." A flicker of something passed through his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. "You speak plainly. I was taught to value honesty. Were you also taught to hold grudges?" Clara met his gaze without flinching. "No, Your Highness." His eyes searched hers, as though seeking something beneath the surface. The moment hung suspended between them, charged with unspoken tension, neither fully understood. At last, Friedrich exhaled softly. "You may go," he said, his voice quieter now. "Thank you." Clara inclined her head, her heart thudding. Without haste, she turned and left the room, the prince's gaze following her until the door closed behind her. The corridor beyond felt cooler, emptier. Her pulse still raced. By the time the kitchens had quieted that evening, Clara's thoughts remained tangled. She moved through the dim servants' wing with weary steps, her mind replaying every glance, every word. Near the servants' staircase, voices drifted from the half-open doorway of a small antechamber. Clara paused, instinct and caution halting her mid-step. Inside, Countess Amalia von Wendt stood in close conversation with a senior chamberlain. "I saw the way he looked at her," the Countess said sharply, her voice low and venomous. "It will not be allowed. That girl must be removed. Quietly, if possible. I will not have my position threatened by some gutter-born creature." "Of course, my lady," the chamberlain replied smoothly. "I will see to it." Clara's breath caught. She backed away silently, her heart pounding. The words burned in her ears. Unseen, unnoticed, she slipped away down the darkened corridor, her mind racing. The days that followed unfolded with a strange, subtle shift, as if some invisible thread had been woven into the rhythm of Clara's duties. At first, she thought it coincidence, an order delivered by a steward requesting that she bring a particular dish to the prince's chambers, or a note instructing her to oversee the selection of rare spices for his meals. Tasks that might have fallen to any of the kitchen staff now, curiously, fell to her. She carried them out with care, wary of drawing notice. Yet each time she entered the prince's domain, she found him there, alone or in quiet conversation with a single aide, offering her a moment of acknowledgement, a glance that lingered a fraction too long. The first such encounter left her breathless. Clara had knocked softly before entering his study with a tray of fruit and wine. The room had smelled faintly of leather and parchment, the light from tall windows casting angular shadows across the floor. The prince had looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Ah," he had said, rising. "It seems you are becoming a familiar presence." Clara had curtsied, her voice steady. "By the steward's order, Your Highness." His mouth quirked at the corner. "Of course." She had placed the tray down with practiced grace, aware of his gaze upon her. Though her pulse had quickened, she had willed herself to remain composed, offering no more than what duty required. But the encounters continued. Twice more she was called upon to deliver small items, a rare tea, a requested book from the palace library. Once, returning from the garden with a basket of fresh herbs, she found the prince himself standing in the doorway of the upper kitchens, speaking with Master Han about the estate's winter stores. Their eyes met across the room. The moment lasted only a breath before she lowered her gaze and resumed her work. But the memory of it lingered, unbidden, stirring something beneath her carefully held composure. She could not deny it, nor did she fully understand it. Friedrich, too, found himself unsettled. Each time he contrived to cross her path, a request for a particular wine only she might select, an unnecessary inspection of the kitchens, he told himself it was harmless curiosity. And yet when he saw her, a slender figure moving with quiet grace, her eyes steady beneath the modest linen cap, he felt the ground shift beneath his certainty. She was unlike anyone within his world of obligation and pretense. There was no artifice in her gaze, no simpering eagerness to please, and the more he watched her, the more acutely he felt the chains of his role tighten around him. The court, ever attuned to such undercurrents, noticed. It began with murmured observations among the servants. Clara caught fragments as she passed through the corridors, snatches of laughter, half-whispered remarks that stopped when she approached. In the great hall, she sensed eyes following her with curiosity, and not always with kindness. Among the nobility, the whispers spread more quickly. It took little for rumor to kindle suspicion, nor for those with their own ambitions to fan the flames. Countess Amalia von Wendt, ever vigilant, watched with growing fury as the prince's attention drifted toward the kitchen maid. Though he spoke no word of it in public, his gaze betrayed him. And the court, eager for scandal, supplied the rest. It was the head housekeeper who summoned Clara first. The summons came late in the afternoon, as the kitchens bustled with preparations for the evening's concert. Clara, called away from the herb station, followed the young page through the winding servants' passageways to a narrow chamber behind the grand staircase. The head housekeeper, a tall, thin woman with iron-grey hair and eyes like cold steel, waited alone. "Come in," she said curtly, motioning to the chair opposite her desk. Clara remained standing. "You are aware," the housekeeper began, her tone clipped, "that your recent proximity to His Highness has become a subject of discussion." Clara met her gaze, her voice even. "I have done only as instructed, madam." "Be that as it may," the woman replied, leaning forward. "Appearances matter here. They matter more than you can yet comprehend. If you value your position, you will ensure that no further impropriety, real or perceived, occurs." Clara's throat tightened, but her voice did not waver. "I understand." "See that you do," the housekeeper said sharply. "You are dismissed." The warning rang in Clara's ears as she returned to the kitchens. Yet even as she resolved to guard herself more closely, a strange ache bloomed beneath her ribs, a longing she could not name, mingled with the fear of what it might cost. That evening, the palace shimmered with candlelight and music. The smaller concert hall, a chamber of carved oak and gilt mirrors, was set for an intimate gathering of the court's most favored. Clara, assigned to serve refreshments discreetly, moved through the room with practiced ease. She kept her gaze lowered, her steps measured, her mind focused on her task. But she felt his presence before she saw him. Prince Friedrich stood near the far wall, conversing quietly with a visiting envoy. The flickering candlelight caught the angles of his face, the gleam of silver embroidery at his cuffs. His gaze, when it lifted, found hers at once. The air seemed to thin around her. For one endless moment their eyes held, unspoken awareness passing between them like a spark drawn too close to dry tinder. Clara's breath caught. She forced herself to look away, her pulse racing, a flush creeping beneath her skin. Countess von Wendt, watching from across the room, saw everything. Her smile did not falter, but her eyes glittered with cold triumph. Before the concert ended, she had acted. The next morning, Clara was summoned again, this time to appear before the assembled court. The summons arrived without explanation, delivered by a pale steward who refused to meet her gaze. Her heart pounded as she climbed the grand staircase, her steps unsteady. Whispers followed her passage, court ladies turning behind painted fans, chamberlains exchanging knowing looks. At the threshold of the audience chamber, a guard blocked her path. "Wait here." Through the half-open doors, she heard the chamberlain's voice, smooth and unhurried. "A letter has come to light," he announced, purporting to reveal an improper relationship between a member of the royal household and His Highness the Prince. The words struck her like a blow. "Bring in the accused," the chamberlain continued. The guard turned to her, expression unreadable. "Enter." The great audience chamber of Castle Falkenhof was rarely so crowded on a grey winter morning. Yet this day, the benches and galleries were filled, nobles in embroidered silks and brocades, courtiers gleaming with jewels, powdered wigs nodding and fans fluttering. The air buzzed with anticipation, thick as fog. Word had spread like wildfire through the court. The prince's scullery maid had been summoned to face judgment. An accusation of scandal had been whispered, embroidered, passed from lip to eager lip. A forged letter, they said, one that revealed an indecent relationship between Clara Voss and His Highness himself. Clara stood alone near the center of the vast hall, beneath towering windows where pale light filtered through frost-laced glass. The stone beneath her feet seemed to press upward, cold and unyielding. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her spine remained straight. Her hands, clasped before her, trembled only once before she stilled them. She would not show fear. The courtiers sat in expectant silence as the head chamberlain took his place on the raised dais. His robe swept the floor, his thin face set in lines of practiced impartiality. "Let it be known," he began, his voice echoing through the chamber, "that Clara Voss, servant in His Majesty's household, stands accused of conduct unbecoming of her station and of attempting to compromise the honor of His Highness the Prince." A ripple of whispers coursed through the crowd. Clara's breath came faster, though her face remained composed. "Evidence has been brought forth," the chamberlain continued, holding aloft a folded parchment sealed in red wax, "in the form of this letter, purportedly penned by the accused, expressing improper sentiment and intent." The letter. Clara stared at it, her pulse racing. She had never written such a thing. The Countess von Wendt's hand was plain in this, though proving it would be near impossible. Her throat tightened, but she raised her chin. The chamberlain broke the seal with deliberate slowness, then read aloud. The words that followed were a cruel mockery, a confession of longing, of intimacy implied but never named, of desperate affection directed toward the prince. The voice within the letter was false, the phrasing wrong, yet to those hungry for scandal, it sounded convincing enough. As the final words echoed through the chamber, a murmur swept the room, sharper now. Fans snapped shut. Heads leaned together. Clara felt each glance like a blade against her skin. "Do you deny these charges?" the chamberlain asked, eyes cold upon her. Clara drew a steady breath. Her voice, when it came, was clear and unwavering. "I do. I have written no such letter, nor have I conducted myself in any way that would merit this accusation. Yet the letter bears your name and hand." "It is a forgery," she said firmly, though her heart pounded so hard she feared they would hear it. "I swear it before you all." A sharper murmur followed, doubt mingled with intrigue. From her place near the dais, Countess von Wendt sat serene, her lips curved in a faint, triumphant smile. The chamberlain regarded Clara for a long moment. "You must understand, Mistress Voss," he said coldly, "that the evidence presented is compelling. Without further proof of innocence, the matter will proceed to judgment." The words struck with brutal force. Clara felt her knees weaken, but she locked them in place, her gaze steady. She would not beg. Not here. Not before them. The Chamberlain turned toward the gathered peers. "Unless any present have cause to speak otherwise," he intoned, "the court will render its decision." A hush fell. Breathless. Waiting. Clara's heart seemed to stop. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice rang out, clear, commanding. "I have cause." Heads turned sharply. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Prince Friedrich stood at the rear of the room, tall and unsmiling, his velvet-clad figure cutting through the sea of pale faces. With measured steps, he moved forward, the crowd parting before him as if drawn by an unseen force. Clara stared, her breath caught in her throat. He reached the dais and faced the Chamberlain. "These charges are false," he said, voice low yet resonant. "This letter is a fabrication, an insult to both Mistress Voss and myself." The Chamberlain's eyes widened. "Your Highness—" "I will speak," Friedrich interrupted, his gaze sweeping the assembled court. Silence fell, tense and brittle. Friedrich turned to face the nobles. His voice, when he spoke again, was steady, burning with conviction. "I know the character of the woman accused. Clara Voss has conducted herself with dignity, with restraint beyond what many in this hall might muster under such trials. She has neither sought my attention nor encouraged it, despite the liberties others have taken with her name." A flush of embarrassment spread through more than one face in the crowd. "I will not permit her to be condemned on false evidence and malicious intent," he continued. "This court should be concerned not with punishing the innocent, but with seeking the truth." A stunned silence held the room. From her seat, Countess von Wendt rose abruptly, color high in her cheeks. Her voice, sharp with outrage, broke the stillness. "Your Highness, surely you see, this servant girl—" "Enough," Friedrich said, his tone like steel. "Your scheming ends here?" Gasps echoed once more. For the first time, Clara saw true fury in the Countess's eyes. But before she could speak again, Friedrich turned to the Chamberlain. "This letter is to be dismissed as false," he commanded. "No action shall be taken against Mistress Voss." The Chamberlain, pale now, bowed. "As His Highness decrees." The nobles sat frozen in disbelief. Countess von Wendt, her composure shattered, gathered her skirts and swept from the hall, her retinue trailing behind her. In the silence that followed, Friedrich's gaze found Clara's. He crossed the space between them, stopping only a breath away. "You should not have been brought here," he said softly. Clara's throat was tight. "Your Highness, you should not have risked." "I would risk far more," he said, voice low. "But the choice now is yours." She stared at him, heart racing. "I would have you by my side," he continued quietly, "though the path will not be easy. I cannot shield you from all that will come. But if you choose to stay, I will face it with you." The air seemed to still between them. For a moment, Clara could not speak. Her heart swelled with a surge of feeling so fierce, so unexpected, it nearly stole her breath. She met his gaze. "I will stay." Relief flickered through his eyes, tempered by understanding. He offered his hand, not as a prince to a servant, but as a man to an equal. Together they turned toward the expectant, watching court. The morning after the gathering, sunlight pierced the high windows of Castle Falkenhof, casting long bars of light across polished marble and velvet-hung corridors. But it was not the usual drone of court business that filled the halls. It was the aftermath of a scandal that had failed to land its blow, and the prince's shocking public defense of Clara Voss. Word spread with the speed of wildfire. Pages whispered the tale beneath archways. Ladies embroidered in sunlit parlors while speaking in low voices behind lace fans. Chamberlains, secretaries, and minor courtiers, all recounted the moment when Prince Friedrich had declared before them all that the accusations were false, had stood beside a kitchen maid, and defended her honor with a conviction none could mistake. In the upper kitchens, where Clara resumed her duties with quiet determination, servants exchanged glances as she passed. Some nodded in silent acknowledgement. Others stared, openly curious now, no longer quite sure how to regard the girl who had stood before the court and refused to bow. Even Master Hahn, stern and implacable, greeted her that morning with a brief nod instead of his usual barked commands. Yet not all eyes were friendly. Behind closed doors, Countess von Wendt and her faction met in hushed urgency. The Countess paced a private withdrawing room, her movements sharp and restless. Though her composure had been shattered the day before, her ambition had not dulled. "We must act swiftly," she told the gathered nobles, her voice a low hiss. "The prince may have silenced us in public, but he will not be permitted to ruin his house for the sake of a servant girl." Some of her allies, an aging baron, a viscount with ambitions of greater influence, nodded grimly. Others hesitated. The prince's actions had stirred unease. Few now wished to place themselves too firmly in opposition. Friedrich, meanwhile, acted with swift precision. He summoned his personal secretary and ordered a full review of the so-called evidence. Within hours, a palace scribe confessed, pressed by the prince's relentless questioning, that the letter had been dictated under pressure by an agent of the Countess. Armed with this truth, Friedrich summoned the Council of Nobles. They gathered in the council chamber beneath the great painted ceiling, some wary, others intrigued. The prince stood at the head of the long oak table, his gaze hard. "The evidence used to accuse Mistress Voss was forged," he announced without ceremony. "The source has been revealed and dismissed. Let no one speak otherwise." A murmur passed through the assembled lords. The Countess was not present. Her influence, though formidable, had suffered a decisive blow. The prince's gaze swept the room, steady and unyielding. "Furthermore," he continued, "I will make my intentions plain. I have asked Mistress Voss to stand beside me, not in secret, not in shame, but in full acknowledgement of her worth and dignity. I intend to take her as my wife." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed from several corners of the room. One elder count leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Your Highness, surely you understand the complications. Tradition demands a noble bride." "I understand perfectly," Friedrich replied coolly. "I also understand that tradition cannot outweigh integrity, nor should it dictate the value of one's character. Mistress Voss has proven herself where many would have faltered. I will not turn from her." A long silence followed. At last, one voice spoke, an unexpected one. The Duke of Bergheim, a powerful figure known for his pragmatism. "Your Highness speaks truly," the Duke said slowly. "Few here would have shown such fortitude. If it is your will, I will not oppose it." A ripple of reluctant agreement followed. Friedrich nodded once. His authority and the force of his resolve had turned the tide. Outside the council chamber, the atmosphere of the palace continued to shift. Where once there had been open scorn, now there was uncertainty. The sight of Clara moving through the halls, head high, no longer drew only mocking glances. A subtle deference had begun to replace disdain. Among the servants, respect took root more quickly. Clara's quiet courage had not gone unnoticed. Those who had once whispered behind her back now offered small courtesies, a nod, a helping hand, a murmured word of support. In the evenings, when she returned to her modest chamber, Clara wrestled with her own doubts. The path ahead was daunting. To stand at the prince's side meant facing a world that would not easily accept her. Yet each time she recalled his voice in the audience chamber, the certainty in his gaze, something within her steadied. She had faced worse, and she would face this. The days passed swiftly. Preparations began for the ceremony, small by royal standards, but deeply symbolic. Friedrich insisted upon it. "I will not parade you before a crowd of those who would only look for fault," he told Clara when they met in the quiet of the palace gardens. "But neither will I hide what you are to me." Clara's voice was soft. "I do not seek grand gestures, Your Highness." His eyes met hers. "Friedrich. You must call me Friedrich now." A faint smile touched her lips, though her heart raced. "Then, I ask only for the truth between us." "You shall have it," he promised. When the day of the wedding arrived, a rare stillness seemed to settle over the palace. The chapel, tucked within the east wing, was adorned with simple beauty, white roses, slender tapers flickering in the cool light. Only a small gathering attended. The Duke of Bergheim stood among them, as did several of the prince's most trusted allies. The countess, pointedly absent, had retreated to her estate days before. Clara entered the chapel clad in a gown of deep sapphire silk, the fabric rich but unadorned, her hair gathered in soft waves beneath a simple veil. Her heart beat a steady rhythm, each step deliberate as she moved down the aisle. Friedrich awaited her at the altar, clad in formal attire, yet his expression was one of quiet, unshakable joy. As the vows were spoken, Clara felt a strange lightness within her, as though the weight of all that had passed had lifted, leaving only the steady truth of the moment. When the ceremony ended and the final words were spoken, Friedrich took her hand and drew her gently into the small gathering beyond the chapel doors. In the candlelit chamber prepared for the celebration, music began, a soft, lilting melody. Friedrich led Clara to the center of the floor. No courtiers whispered here. No judgment clouded the air. Their first dance began with the faintest of touches, his hand at her waist, her fingers resting lightly against his shoulder. As they moved together, the world seemed to fall away. There was only the warmth of his gaze, the strength of his hold, the quiet certainty that after all they had faced, they stood here, unbroken. The music swelled softly, and Clara lifted her eyes to meet his. "I never thought this would be possible," she whispered. Friedrich's voice was low. "Nor did I. But you made it so." As the final notes drifted into silence, the gathered guests looked on, not at a prince and a servant, but at two souls bound by something stronger than rank or expectation. Clara's heart swelled with a happiness so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. And as Friedrich drew her close, pressing a kiss to her brow, she knew with absolute certainty that she would face whatever might come, so long as he stood beside her. Thank you so much for listening to this story, all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the story? Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like to show your support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and life lessons. And before we say goodbye, we'd like to remind you that on the end screen, you'll see a recommendation for another exciting and charming story. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.